We're very blessed today to have a guest preacher doing our sermon. Please welcome Rabbi Moti Reber.
Yes, you may be seated. Good morning. I want to thank you for tolerating me to this morning. I want to thank Mother Doreen for inviting me. I'm Rabbi Moti Reber. I'm the executive director of an organization called Kansas Interfaith Action, and I'm going to spend the next few minutes explaining what that is and why you have a rabbi giving you the sermon today. We didn't do my bio, and I'll just give you a brief version of it. I've lived in Kansas since 2007, so I think that makes me kind of an advanced beginner, right? I lived in Wichita for 3 years, and now we've been living in the Kansas City metro area since 2010. I've been the director of this organization since 2011. Early on, it was a chapter of Interfaith Power and Light, which was a religious climate change organization. Now it's a multi-issue organization called Kansas Interfaith Action. I have a wife and 3 adult children, and we live in Overland Park. So Kansas Interfaith Action is a 501c3 nonpartisan, nonprofit issue advocacy organization. So I'm going to read you our mission statement. Kansas Interfaith Action is a statewide multi-faith issue advocacy organization that puts faith into action by educating, engaging, and advocating on behalf of people of faith and the public on a variety of racial, economic, and climate justice issues. So what advocacy means is that we try to have an effect on policy on the state level. So advocacy means asking for what you want. I think people tend to kind of get it confused with politics or partisan politics, but really, if you wanted to have a stop sign on your corner and you went somewhere to ask them to do that, that would be advocacy. So although national politics gets a lot of the attention, most of the issues that have the greatest impact on our lives happen here in Topeka on the state level. Housing policy, transportation and energy policy, criminal justice policy, healthcare policy, and so much more get decided below the radar on the state level. So I'm going to read you a paragraph from an article. Let me see if I put the quote in here. So this is from the Episcopal Church.org, Social Justice Advocacy and Engagement, from the pew to the public square. And this is just I can give you the link to that. But this is a representative paragraph. Episcopalians understand our Christianity as something that impacts our social and communal lives, as well as our private and personal lives. As a result, Episcopalians are called not only to live Christ-like lives personally, but to work for the good of our communities by seeking structural change. So KIFA was established KIFA is the acronym, K-I-F-A, so you have to, I didn't come with a glossary, so I'm just going to explain it as I go. KIFA was established in 2016 as the moderate voice of faith in Kansas. So other states have legacy organizations, could be councils of churches. Oklahoma has a council of churches, or some denominations have advocacy offices. But in Kansas before 2016, the only faith voice that was heard in public policy was the voice of the far right. Speaking about, but that left out tens of thousands of people just like you, who were not having their voices or the way that we understand our faith represented in the halls of government on the multitude of issues that concern us. So KIFA was established to try to bridge that gap. So over the course of the years since 2016, KIFA has gone from a fledgling organization trying to find a place for itself in Kansas, both in the faith community and in policy, to being a relatively well-established organization with currently 3.5 full-time staff members and a reputation in Kansas politics that varies depending on which side of the aisle you'll tend to sit on. And over the 6 years, we have built up a very strong coalition of mainstream voices of faith KIFA is the state public policy office of the Central State Synod of the ELCA Lutheran Church. And we also have partnerships with the Episcopal Diocese of Kansas, with the Unitarian Universalist Fellowships of Kansas, with the Kansas-Oklahoma Conference of the United Church of Christ, and with the Mercy and Justice team of the Great Plains Conference of the United Methodist Church. So KIFA's mission, or the way that we organize our work, is based on what Dr. King called the three evils. So Dr. King had the three evils of racism, materialism, and militarism. And there's been inflation since then, so now there's four evils. And the way that we organize it is racial justice, poverty and economic justice, gun violence, and climate disruption. So climate disruption is the one that Dr. King didn't know about because it came to fore after his death. But it certainly is a pressing moral issue that we deal with, that we're not dealing with at all with the seriousness that it requires. So virtually everything that we work on falls into one or more of these categories. And that's how we organize our legislative priorities as they come out. So I'll share with you a few of our legislative priorities this year. So we have this, last year we rolled out what we call the Faithful Protection of Democracy initiative. I'll talk a little bit more about where this comes from in a moment, but the pillars of that, or the planks of that, are the support of public education, both in terms of full funding and in terms of the right of the student to have access to materials. That's a full education. And you know what I'm saying here? We're against book bans, and especially and the restrictions on the teaching, particularly of minoritized populations or of LGBT people. That tends to be what they go after. Voting rights, the rights of everyone to vote, of every citizen to vote, and protection for LGBTQ plus people. We worked pretty hard on that last year. In the area of economic and racial justice, Medicaid expansion, April is here, so I'll mention Medicaid expansion. I have my button on. Medicaid expansion is something we've been working on since we've been KIFA. Every year, I think it's the greatest moral priority, remains the greatest moral priority in Kansas policy. And it's very frustrating that despite the fact that 70% of people support it, we haven't been able to get it over the finish line. Payday loan reform, which is something Topeka Jump has been working on. We're working in coalition with them. And a compassionate social safety net. So that a rejection of the harsh and judgmental welfare reform framing, and a little bit of grace and generosity toward those who are suffering in this sometimes harsh economic system. And in the area of climate and clean energy, we have a variety of issues that we work on, one of which is greater access to solar panels on rooftops, both of homes and of small businesses, of which churches qualify. Churches are considered small businesses. We think of these issues as intersecting. One of the reasons we went from a single issue organization to a multi-issue organization is because all of these issues have impacts on each other. So if we buy a bunch of stuff we don't need, or we buy bigger cars than we need, and it causes climate disruption, that leads to immigration, which we then answer with racism and militarized policing. So, causes and effects are intertwined. And the other major issue we're talking about this year is white Christian nationalism. And I'm going to plug this a couple of times. This is the attempt to take power by a far-right understanding of Christianity that privileges those who have been on the top of this society historically. Rich people, white people, straight people, and men. We can see the repercussions of this in anti-choice and anti-LGBT laws, as well as the protections of corporate power and the insistence on lowering taxes on wealthy people. It's important for Christians to talk about this and to organize about it, and I'll talk more about that in a moment. So we think of these issues not so much as political issues, or as policy issues, but as moral issues. Systemic racism is a moral issue. Poverty and injustice are moral issues. Climate change is a moral issue. Recognizing them is moral awareness, and addressing them is justice. And frankly, in many ways, a lot of these problems seem to be getting worse. For those of us who came of age during what was, I think, a more optimistic era, the staggering of democracy under attack by those who no longer trust it is very challenging, as well as the collapse of the human rights and human dignity framing that came to the fore after World War II and is facing what may be its final collapse right now in Gaza. So our political lives right now are less about achieving high hopes and aspirations, although we still have them, but about staving off the worst repercussions, particularly of climate change. So I consider myself to be in the harm reduction business largely, especially in a place like Kansas. But that means engagement is not lack of engagement is not an option. It's not a choice. It depends on each and every one of us. And it's irresponsible to abandon society and our neighbors and history itself to forces of the far right. I want to talk about advocacy. I want to talk briefly about advocacy as faith development. So I know that I consider that there's, those of us who have been in Kansas politics will find this next framing funny, but I consider faith development to be a three-legged stool. So one of them is personal interaction with a higher power, salvation, personal faith development. The second one is mission work, which Christians are really good at. That's addressing harms, addressing the harms that have affected populations, trying to ameliorate the damage done. The third leg is advocacy, because where mission work looks at the river and pulls and picks up garbage around the river or tries to keep the river from being polluted, advocacy looks back upriver to find out why it's being polluted in the first place. That's what advocacy does. It tries to look at root causes. It tries to look at causes and conditions, because that's the only way we'll get past the point where we need to keep addressing people's wounds. But Rabbi, I hear you saying, what can we do about these overwhelming issues? Well, I'm glad you asked. You can get engaged in the work of Kansas Interfaith Action and strengthen the moral voice that we bring to these issues in Topeka. Because as an individual, it's very hard to do stuff. People run for office, whatever they do. But as a group, as a mass, as an organization, we can bring our voices, we can focus our voices and bring more power to bear. People of faith, communities of faith have a vital role to play in bringing about a better future for all of us. And there are four main reasons for this. First, faith communities have the ability to frame the issues we face in moral language in a way that resonates with our deepest values. Our books teach us that public life is not only practical, but holy, and our books mean what they say. Second, faith communities have a unique moral weight in their community. Third, faith communities are focused on building community, on weaving together the tattered remnants of the social fabric that has been so picked apart over the last generation or two. And finally, faith communities are dedicated to core values of inclusivity, justice, mercy, faith. They should be. Faith communities that are dedicated to these values of inclusivity, justice, mercy, and peace are an important counterweight, or in Hebrew, a tikkun, a repair, to the damage that religion has done and is doing in our society, both historically and in the current day. Right-wing religion has not only damaged the country, it has damaged the cause of religion itself by making all of God's people guilty by association. And that we cannot afford. Not only because we want our churches to survive, but because we want that voice of moral clarity to continue to be strong. And anything that undermines it undermines God's work. And finally, the particular element that Kifa brings is that of interfaith. The world that we want to build is a multifaceted world, a multicultural world. No single church, no single denomination can bring the change we need. Because the world we're building is not monolithic, neither must our organizations be. America is becoming the most multiracial, multicultural society in all of history. And some people might fear that or work against it, but we celebrate it. It is in all of us working together that we build the world that we want to live in, a world that is worthy of our children. I will publicize a few upcoming days, upcoming events. This coming Wednesday is Equality Day. So if you have nothing better to do, it's about 2 miles that way. Is it that way? Equality Day is the LGBTQ plus day. We're expecting further attempts to restrict the rights of LGBTQ people, particularly our trans siblings, which were such a focus of the legislature last year. There's a big rally about that. February 5th, which is a week from Monday, is Wealth Day. That's our Climate and Clean Energy Day. On February 4th, we have a number of issues coming up around Medicaid expansion. February 4th, which is next week, is Medicaid expansion Sabbath. I'm sure Mother Doreen will mention this, but we're asking all of our member churches, all affiliated churches with KIFA, to mention Medicaid expansion, to lift up Medicaid expansion in some manner in worship. And then that will also lead to February 14th, a Love Thy Neighbor rally at the State House, which will be a faith-focused rally in support of Medicaid expansion. On February 6th, which is a week from Tuesday, we will be having a forum panel discussion about white Christian nationalism in this very church. So KIFA did a series last year. We did an online series, and then we did some in-person events about the threat of white Christian nationalism, what it is, how it affects us, and how we can band together to resist it. We've had it. We have what we're calling the Small Cities Project. So we've been doing some organizing in some of the smaller cities, but we also did one in Wichita. We also did one in Johnson County, and now it's Topeka's turn. So Professor Chris Jones from Washburn, Mother Doreen will be on the panel, I'll be on the panel, and our faith engagement staff person, Reverend Rachel Pryor, will be doing that. That's Tuesday, February 6th at 7 p.m. I don't know if it'll be in this space, but it'll be in this building. And I encourage you to share it with your friends and to come to that. And then also we have a sign-up sheet in the back. If you're interested in learning more about KIFA or just staying up with what's going on, we need your email address. So there's a sign-up sheet in the back in the hallway there for that. And then also we have monthly meetings. We have an advocates meeting on the second Monday of the month and a clergy meeting on the second Tuesday of the month, which is kind of like where the activists go. And we know that so in conclusion, we know that the issues that we face are many, and there's no guarantee that we'll be able to address them in anything like a comprehensive way. But we must make the effort. I return to this point. There's a rabbinic text that I love, and that it says, "It is not up to you to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it." So let me say that again. It is not up to you to complete the work, but neither are you free to desist from it. For this work, addressing racial injustice, addressing poverty and economic inequality, addressing the growing and unfathomable crisis of human-caused climate disruption, is what we are here to do. It is what God wants us to do. This is the way that we make God's love and God's purpose manifest in our world. And there is no one to do this work but us. In this case, we really are God's hands. For the sake of the world, we cannot give up, and with God's help, we cannot fail. Please join us in this sacred work. Thank you.